Okay, can everyone see the presentation? Great.
Yes.
All right, so thank you all so much for being here to review commercial design guidelines for Dundalk. My name's Jessie Hillman. I'm a new community planner with the Eastern Sector in Baltimore County. And we've been working on these guidelines for about 5 months. And this is the community input meeting where we can get some feedback, additional ideas, address any concerns before it's then finalized and submitted to the planning board and the county council for adoption. Started. Oops. So the agenda is, I'll just give a brief background on how we got to where we are with these guidelines and what they are, what it's all about. We'll talk about the commercial revitalization district boundary and the proposed expansion of that boundary, which will also be what's called a design review panel area, and I'll get into detail about what that is. And then we'll just dig into the guidelines. I'll provide a brief summary of each page and provide an opportunity for you to present any ideas, concerns, questions that we can answer in the moment. But also, these guidelines are available on our webpage, and I do encourage you to follow up with me one-on-one within the next week or so, and I can answer any additional questions or concerns you have. Then we'll talk through the next steps in the timeline, and I'll answer any final questions. Sound good? So I wanted to talk about these guidelines in the context of all of the commercial revitalization resources that are in Dundalk, because really these guidelines will serve as an additional tool within a kit of tools. The sustainable community area is one designation that covers pretty much all of Dundalk, and it's a state Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development program that provides funding and revitalization resources and guidance for community development, commercial revitalization, and sustainability projects. So that's a state program. There's also the Main Street program, which is another state program that covers just the historic downtown of Dundalk, and that provides additional resources and guidance, really focused on providing a welcoming commercial environment and kind of honoring the history of the area and improving the appearance of the buildings. And then there's the Commercial Revitalization District. This is a county program, and it's staffed by planners like yours truly, who will work closely with businesses, business associations, to help guide folks through a range of programs that are part of it. So there's Architect on Call, which provides free consultation with an architect regarding building renovations or facade improvements. There's the Building Improvement Loan Program, which is an interest-free loan up to $30,000 for building improvements within this district. There's the Commercial Revitalization Action Grant. You've probably seen those dollars used on things like the farmers market that Dundalk has, planters that are going to be replenished with new flowers, shop local campaigns, things like that are funded through that program. And then there's the Commercial Revitalization Tax Credit. So there's this whole suite of resources that are intended to spur new development and improve, the entire area for visitors and patrons. The design review panel is an additional layer of technical review that can ensure that new development that occurs or redevelopment that occurs is adhering to certain quality standards. It's comprised of a panel of architects, landscape architects, engineers and planners who are appointed by the county executive and the county council. They meet every month to review development proposals, and they make recommendations to encourage design excellence in accordance with the county master plan and any specific community plans like these design guidelines that we'll review. And you can see here on the right, these are the existing design review panel areas. You'll see that there isn't one in Dundalk yet, so part of this process is proposing that Dundalk be added to that technical panel review. This is just an example of what the design review panel does. So this is a master plan for this Hilton property in Pikesville. And all of these red lines, these red comments here, were created by the design review panel. So things like, the quality of the crosswalk material, what kind of lighting should there be, or improve adding lighting, thinking about what the fencing looks like and making sure that it's quality materials. And what they used as their guide was design review guidelines that Pikesville had created for their main street. And so what resulted was an improved plan that was less barren, more streetscape improvements to make it a more engaging environment for pedestrians. So we've been meeting for the past 5 months with an advisory committee composed of community and business leaders and Baltimore County government staff. Our goals were to define these design guidelines for the commercial revitalization district, and then to also think about these geographic boundaries for the district and whether it should expand and where it should expand and why. And what you see here on the right is the new proposed boundary for the commercial revitalization district and design review panel area. So even though design review panel and commercial revitalization, those are two distinct designations, but they would align in terms of the boundaries. So what you see in the bold lines is the original district, and everything in the hatch marks is what's proposed for the expansion. So we are proposing to incorporate more contemporary properties both to the north and to the south. So that includes the Logan Village Shopping Center, some properties around the Dundalk traffic circle, as well as some properties like north of the McDonald's. Any questions about the area map? Okay. And so this will be proposed, this will be shared with the planning board. The county council will submit this for a resolution to adopt these new boundaries.
Jessica?
Yes.
I do have one. Everything looks commercial except for the area just south of Dunman Way.
Yes.
Which I think is mostly some residential and then some apartment buildings.
You are correct. What is included in that area of the old Dundalk neighborhood is 2 churches that may be seeing, we're seeing a lot of churches that might be going through renovations or thinking about new uses for the space, for some of their spaces. So the reason that addition was proposed was in case that happens with those historic churches.
But you've only got one. That only covers St. Rita's.
Oh, I thought it was meant to include 2. That may be an oversight, so thank you. But yeah, St. Rita's is included in that.
And I would assume the old Dundalk United Methodist would be the other.
Nick was, I think we had 2 churches in mind.
Yeah, it looks as so if you follow Dunman Way there, Scott, that area just kind of south of where Dunman Way is.
Yeah.
That would be the old Methodist church there.
It's,
Because
it's Saint,
that's where,
Saint George's and Saint Matthew's, I think it is.
yes,
With
Yeah.
the one that's, frankly, it's really pretty. It always has really pretty landscaping.
Okay,
in-
that's the other
in
one.
between
Okay.
Shipping Place and Dundalk Avenue.
yeah, that's the
Gotcha.
one that's
I was
included there.
thinking Dundalk United.
Yeah, and if you look at that parcel there, it's actually, that parcel that goes all the way back down to, and I'm sorry because it's I don't remember what
I
street it is.
understand now.
but
I got it.
That's the old gymnasium, the old school buildings at St.
Yep.
Rita's.
Okay. And part of the reason why these churches are included is because they are, you know, beautiful buildings. And if there was going to be new development or infill, you would want that to be part of the palette that is considered when those new developments occur. Okay. And so this is the timeline. Where we are in the timeline right now is where the green dot is, where we're just kind of reviewing the final draft of this. And once it's finalized, we'll then introduce this for a resolution, hopefully for adoption sometime in June. And so without further ado, let's dig into the guidelines themselves. Okay. So let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, or not. So these are the Dundalk Design Guidelines, recommendations for commercial revitalization. This is the table of contents. And this introduction, it really is just kind of everything I described with you right now. The purpose and goals are to, you know, really provide some quality guidance for the design review panel when considering new or redevelopment in the commercial revitalization district. And this is the same map we reviewed. Okay, so digging right into it, we'll start with the storefront facade. What follows are kind of detailed concepts of how the storefront facade should look. And we've got all these subcategories. So the first one is the entrance. The focus of the entrance guidelines is really about building transparency, making it easy to see into the establishment, to really making it welcoming, easily accessible, you know, not too cluttered. That's the intention. Is there any? I know that we're going to go through this quickly, but does anyone have any ideas or concerns they'd like to express about storefront entrances? Okay. The next page is display window. So again, this is all about really creating an inviting atmosphere. We want, you know, display windows to have a display, to be maintained with highly transparent glass, no, you know, tinted windows, nothing that's difficult to see what's going on inside. And something, you know, that's striking and will draw the attention of passersby. Any ideas or concerns? I'm just going to ask that after every page and provide a little time. Transom windows are the windows above the display window. This is, you know, more on historic buildings. Oftentimes these are filled in, but if they're not filled in, we do ask that they be maintained with glass, so that, you know, you can have that natural light coming in. Any concerns or issues with transom windows. Okay, signs. This is a little bit more meaty. So this is really about having, consistency with the signs, having it be made of high quality materials. Blade signs are recommended. You'll see that represented in the do image, which has a sign that's kind of coming out perpendicular to the entrance. So you can attract attention by folks passing the sidewalk. But then there's also an additional sign that has some gooseneck lighting, and there's consistency in the materials and the design of the sign. What's discouraged is, having so much, temporary signage that it's obscuring being able to view inside, having, temporary signs that are left up for prolonged periods, things of that nature. Is there anything about signage that folks think is missing or have questions about?
Jesse,
Yes.
just a clarification. So I see that all of these are recommended or discouraged, which suggests that there's not necessarily prohibited. Is that the case? Is that how this works?
That is the case. Yeah, that was very deliberate. There was concern expressed that folks, commercial interest is very much desired in this area. And so making it too prohibitive was not the intention. It's really about just developing some guidelines that can then be, can inform design review, but not necessarily
Thanks. I just wanted to understand what
yeah, that was intentional.
Scott, it's Lori. I just wanted to say that the design advisory panel recommendations in all areas by code are advisory. They are not binding
okay.
to the hearing officer.
I did not realize that. Thanks for that clarification.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. All right. So with awnings, it's all about quality materials, having signage that's not too excessive, and having it, placed in specific areas, like on the part that drops down, the valance. Sorry. So yeah, any ideas or questions about awnings specifically? All right. Storefront lighting. So this is about having illumination that is, each commercial development has its own illumination. It's not relying on street lights or public lighting, both for safety and for aesthetics. It is encouraged to install seasonal, festive lighting, maybe lights in the trees, but also, knowing when to take that down when appropriate. And gooseneck lighting is encouraged. Any additional, there is another section in the streetscape where we talk a little bit more about lighting. Any questions or concerns? All right. And safety is another consideration with these as well, Security. Speaking of, yeah, so wanting, you want to make a safe environment, but if you have too much in the way of security measures that's very obvious, it can actually make an environment feel less safe. So these guidelines were intended to not overdo it, but to have effective but also subtle security measures. So you can see, kind of a discrete alarm button, not necessarily having these like fixed, prison grates over your storefront facade, because it just doesn't look very welcoming, and it actually makes you feel less safe when there's too much of that going on. That being said, obviously, you want a place to be safe, so there should be measures in place like, roll down grates if they're necessary. Maybe you can also paint them and decorate them so that it's not an eyesore when the store is closed. Any additional considerations for security? All right. I just want to check and make sure there's no attendees. Okay, no, we're good. Everyone can talk. Materials and techniques for both renovation and new construction. So this is thinking about, those high quality materials, also thinking about sustainability, having some LEED standards in place that could be incorporated, but really wanting materials like masonry, wood, glass, metal, stone, rather than things like vinyl or aluminum siding. And maybe even, if that is up, perhaps restoring, if it's a more historic part of the area, perhaps restoring that storefront to its original facade. That would be encouraged. So any additional considerations for materials and ways to renovate? All right, so getting into new construction. So this is really pertains more to those additional areas that were proposed, because the original commercial revitalization district is more historic, more dense, and as you go further south, you do have these really large areas like the Logan Village Shopping Center, where there's a lot of parking lot, a lot of building footprint. So there might be more opportunity for new construction there than there would up north. So with site planning, it's encouraged that you would develop for mixed use. So that means, mixing both commercial with residential or perhaps office or entertainment uses. So really having, a place where you can live, work, and play, thinking about those concepts together. Having a place that's more conducive to community gathering. So community plazas and courtyards are really encouraged. And thinking about the setbacks. So, making an area that is easily accessible for pedestrians. So you don't want the setback to be too far, because that's really more accommodating of vehicles over pedestrians. And so you want to construct near the front of property lines. And then also having some green standards in there. So having electric vehicle charging stations, solar panels, native landscaping where it makes sense. And really just developing for people over cars wherever possible. Any additional, this is a big concept, so I'm sure there's additional components to consider in this area. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to make a nuisance of myself. When it comes to parking, are there current regulations as to how much parking, for example, has to be at the, whether it's the old Logan Village Shopping Center or at the main Dundalk Village? or is there some flexibility there?
So, for zoning purposes, there is, off-street parking requirements depending on the type of building and the size. Variances can be pursued to that. And clearly these guidelines are in favor of developing an environment that is more about engaging people and not having huge parking lots. So addressing that. But I would look to Lori, who is far more expert than me in that issue.
Basically, zoning is going to determine the amount of parking based on the uses. So, like restaurants require more parking spaces and some other retail uses. And right now with your shopping center, so with so many vacancies in it, there's probably not much parking requirement. That's why we wanted to see, that huge parking lot looked at for development as some kind of mixed use.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll chime in. This is Amy, since I was sort of pushing for this. It's just the idea, obviously a developer would need to have some other plan for what they're doing, and that would trigger review of whatever the parking requirements are based on what that plan is. But we just wanted these guidelines to more encourage a redevelopment opportunity rather than treat things as they are, as if that's how it's always going to be.
No, and I support that. My thought was more to what degree does the current parking, planning parking requirements mitigate against trying to do some of this. So that was more where my head was.
No, that's important. Thank you. All right, so beyond new construction, there's also infill. So that's when you have a vacant property like what you see in the top image. Obviously you would want that to be developed, but you want some standards for how that's developed. So it is encouraged, but you want the height and scale of it to be, complementary or respectful of the surrounding heights and scales. You can kind of see in the bottom image, a sky rise that is completely dwarfing its neighbors and kind of swallowing them. So somewhat discouraging of that. But having the same step back and, encouraging mixed use as well with infill development. Thinking about the architectural styles and wanting to be, honoring what's surrounding the area with how that building's developed. Any ideas around infill? And this applies more to the historic area that's already developed. All right. So thinking about identity and culture and placemaking. So, murals on blank walls and rear walls, those are encouraged. Having, architectural details really highlighted or developed in new construction buildings are encouraged. And then having like gateway public art or signage. Dundalk already has quite a bit of that, but really encouraging that as a way to build a sense of place. Like, I know where I am, I came through that gateway, and I'm here, rather than just passing through and not knowing. And then there was discussion around if there was some sculpture in like the right of way, maybe at that traffic circle towards the south, you would want to make sure that it's not vulnerable to damage from vehicles. So that was considered as well. And we did say that, murals would be community approved. They would go through some sort of, process. Any additional ideas around identity, culture, and public art? All right. So getting into the streetscape, this shows kind of, what is more typical at the top, and then what could be with complete streets, which means it's, accommodating multiple modes of transportation safely, really taking advantage of those broad sidewalks with cafe seating and making it a more welcoming environment generally with more street trees and other landscaping so that you have some shade and can breathe a little easier. So the first category in streetscape is traffic calming. So this was, Dundalk definitely gets wider and more highway-like as you go south. So thinking about traffic calming measures to make it more conducive to pedestrians walking around. It was recommended to locate crosswalks that are, well marked in coordination with Department of Public Works at intersections where you want more pedestrian convenience. Thinking about bump outs, so that's when you make the road a little bit narrower at certain intersections so that there's less of a distance for pedestrians to safely cross. Those bump outs can be with like little flex flags, like you see in that top image, or they can be more permanent, curbing, and you can actually do landscaping in those bump outs, and that could be another attractive feature. If you're going to have bike lanes, let's make them protected with, some spacing or some flex flags or bollards so that folks do feel like they can safely bike on that street. And yeah, yes.
Jesse, I appreciate the some of the recommendations here. I'm just wondering about how do you handle mass transit stops and the access for the large buses and so forth to get to them? I mean, is there a way to address that at all? And I'm asking just an open-ended question on that.
Absolutely. You mean with bike lanes?
Well, when you have on the previous one of the previous photos, there was probably there was a bump out with some trees and everything, which looked great. Yeah, this one here, and I'm thinking, how does that address the need for mass transit stops? And I'm just saying, there's a necessity here, but how do you deal with that?
Absolutely. And I will, I'll admit I'm not a transportation expert, but I do know that these guidelines are intended to actually, really accommodate mass transit like buses. You want to see more, multiple modes of transportation beyond just single, vehicles, single cars. So later on, we'll talk about street furniture and really wanting to make bus stops into like accommodating places with benches and shade, and thinking about making that bus stop actually like a comfortable place to use so that more people are using buses.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I just wanted to throw that out there for thought.
Hey,
Thank you.
Robert. Yeah, I know down in DC because I work down in by the VA. A lot of what they do down there is they have these slots for buses only, where the buses will insert to the area where people are waiting, get in, and that way it doesn't block traffic.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know there's a way to do it. It's just something that you need to consider, and for either large or even the smaller buses. But that's good. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think I'll add a note about that and making sure that it's we want to encourage bus stops, and that's not really reflected here yet. So thank you for that.
Yep, thank you.
Any other ideas? Great. So green infrastructure and landscaping. Streetscapes are inherently, impermeable, impervious surfaces. So we do want to do whatever we can to address the stormwater runoff that's happening because rain can't soak into the ground in place. So incorporating things like rain gardens, which are depressed landscape beds, into things like bump outs, like what you see here at the top. This is, slowing down traffic, making it safer for pedestrians, and it's also treating stormwater. So you're hitting multiple goals with one piece of planning. We encourage native plants and trees for both, decorative and functional landscaping. It cools the air, it provides shade, makes it easier to breathe. But they should be regularly pruned because if you have all of these, unpruned tree branches obscuring the storefront, all of that work that went into the storefront is kind of for naught. So definitely wanting maintained landscaping as part of the guidance here. Any ideas or questions, concerns about landscaping?
I do have, I don't know if this was discussed, but the area of Dundalk Avenue between the Logan Village Shopping Center and the roundabout, where you've got both Logan Village and Turner Station not facing the street. So you're looking at like fences on one side and back of houses on the other side. Can anything be done to sort of soften that? I mean, I know it's all private property, but.
Well, yeah, I would think along the right of way, there's potential for additional landscaping, street trees, just something to break that space up a little bit. Anyone else have ideas?
I will say, Scott and I have talked about that stretch many times, but the challenge is it's private property owners, and so trying to figure out how to coordinate with each individual property owner about how ugly their fence is in a way that's not offensive or all of that. I didn't think that these guidelines were necessarily the best place to do that, but since this is targeting commercial properties, but I don't know how the county would, it's kind of like we've talked about financial incentives for property owners to make that shift, but it's sort of like it would obviously be most impactful if an entire block of people did it. So that would be challenging. So
one of the other kind of difficult factors with that is in a lot of those areas, it's, yards and fences right up to the sidewalk, and then a very small easement that is, there isn't really room to plant a tree without making the sidewalk problematic. And the median strip in some of those areas doesn't have grass on it, or it's grass that's mowed and covered by the county. So that would be on the county to put something there and upkeep that.
A good point, though.
Would it be feasible to get a grant to cover fencing for that area?
Well, if this commercial revitalization district expansion occurred, it would qualify for different funding for things like that.
My question, I would also then question at that point with the houses that line the sides of that street. How many of the people living in those houses are the owners of the house versus people renting those houses. They are a lot of row home style homes, and I don't know how many of those are actual occupied by the owners or occupied by renters.
And again, this is really more focused on the commercial properties themselves, but this is but it's true that, you know, that it's all about the continuity along Dundalk Avenue, and that needs to be taken into account. I made a note.
May I make one more comment?
Please.
Years ago, they were talking about putting a roundabout at Liberty Parkway, Willow Spring Road, Dundalk Avenue, and Pine Avenue. But it never, you know, came to fruition here. So I don't know if that's something that can be looked into or not looked into, because it would make the flow of traffic on Dundalk Avenue a lot more feasible, I think, at times.
That's interesting. I'll look into that. At Liberty Parkway?
Yes, it's Liberty Parkway, Willow Spring Road, Pine Avenue, and Dundalk Avenue.
Thank you. So moving on to street furniture, unless there's any other questions or comments. Okay. Street furniture basically is talking about all of the objects that are for public use in the public right of way. So this is cafe seating, street lighting, bike racks, planters, benches, thinking about those bus stops and making those accommodating. So we want, you know, materials that are of high quality and kind of show a sense of permanence, which also makes the place seem safer when you have that kind of security and the permanence of the street furniture. It's recommended that it's clustered together and like you see to the right, so that you have, you know, designated places for you know, gathering or incidental hanging out. It's recommended that on wide sidewalks you would have street furniture, and you want some uniformity in the color palette and material. Install bike racks everywhere. That's very encouraged, and just avoiding things that look cheap, like plastic folding furniture, and like old school street lighting. That's like the sodium vapor lamps you see at the bottom there, you know, and maybe in favor of something more sustainable, like LED lighting. Any ideas or questions about street furniture? And again, I think it's mentioned somewhere in here, but it does talk about thinking about, you know, bus stops, and if it's not in here, then it needs to be. So I'm glad that point was made earlier.
Jesse, just a point on, I'm not an MTA person or anything about that, but just since you brought it up, or I brought it up before, but I guess the MTA ought to be looking at things like this plan before they go out and start spending money putting stuff up. I guess it's their money that goes into some of these bus stops. Not that what they provide these days isn't reasonable, but it needs to be in consonance with what the community has already kind of developed. So, and
That's a great point.
somehow that needs to be communicated to them, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. we did have Department of Public Works, which oversees the streets, review these guidelines just to kind of
Right.
make any changes that were needed. But I didn't think about MTA. And yeah, these are, these are soft guidelines that are,
Yeah.
aspirational, but yeah, we would want MTA to buy in and support and help enforce and implement this kind of vision.
Right.
Anyone else? All right. I think this is the last one, parking lots. So, parking lots are necessary. They're a necessary part of our commercial environment, but they also create kind of a dead space. So really thinking about how to liven that up. So incorporating green infrastructure like canopy trees to both provide shade and also address stormwater runoff. Pervious pavement and rain gardens as well. And then thinking, about solar arrays. So solar panels could also provide shade for vehicles while creating energy, which is awesome. I think you might have been to the IKEA recently, and you can see solar arrays in that parking lot, which is pretty neat. Including pedestrian pathways to make sure that it's safe and easy for people to navigate in these parking lots and get to the storefront. And then if there is, a really large parking lot that might be from, an older time when that much parking was deemed necessary, making that parking lot available for community events like farmers market or a food truck festival or things like that, so that it becomes a more active community gathering space rather than just an empty lot. Installing bike lights, thinking about nighttime security with street lights or rather parking lot lights. And yeah, so that's the intention with parking lots. Any additional ideas or thoughts around parking?
So, quick question: has there been any discussion on introducing parking spaces for people who use electric cars,
And
charging
installing
stations,
the charging stations.
along with the solar idea?
You know what? I think, oh, we did. So in the second bullet, it does say electric vehicle charging stations, but but it doesn't say specific like spaces for electric vehicles. So that could be added.
Okay. Also, from a different perspective, I'm a huge fan of the trees and foliage and that, but from a safety concern, in certain personal safety martial arts classes that I've been in, we discuss the type of foliage and trees that are there. Would that also be regularly pruned and kept down to keep people from being able to hide behind them?
That's a great point. So it was maintenance was emphasized, pruning maintenance was emphasized in the green infrastructure page, but that can be reiterated here, especially since we have such a lush parking lot in the image there. So I will.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jesse, it wasn't brought up in your previous slides, but I got a real problem with, like a lot of people do, with people throwing trash on the sidewalks these days, and I don't know whether they're thinking or not thinking. I guess they're not. But the point is that trash receptacles or recycling receptacles or either one, that should be, I guess, should be addressed somewhere in the suggestions, and how to place them and so forth, and how many there need to be and so forth. But if you don't provide them, you're going to end up with a beautiful space that is just messed up with trash laying on the sidewalk. So
That's a great point. Yeah, it's just barely touched on in the street furniture section. And so that can be
Okay.
better emphasized. So thank you.
I think that would be a great addition. One challenge is who's responsible for picking it up, because
Amen.
we've definitely had we've had challenges clarifying who's going to do that, and literally battled about one trash can for a year and a half. And yeah, I would be amazed.
I personally take responsibility for my road from my house all the way up to the intersection, and it's 2 miles of trash along the road, and it has to be done every 3 or 4 weeks. And it's amazing how absolutely inconsiderate folks are, and some of the stuff you find along the road, I won't even go there. But the point is that if you don't provide the trash receptacles, and someone has to be responsible for emptying them, and I'm not sure how to get that resolved. But again, that's beyond this design issue. But it's got to be incorporated, at least the receptacles themselves. So I got a real, it's a real thing about people throwing trash on the sidewalks and the roads. It just bothers me greatly.
Yeah, I just actually got a text message from one of the residents that lives off of Liberty Parkway. And he goes over and checks the trash cans on Dundalk Avenue. He just emptied 3 of them, and all 3 of them were filled with debris of somebody doing renovations in their house.
Wow.
So, like drywall and stuff like that. And he could barely even pick them up. And I mean, I thank him, but it shouldn't be his responsibility to go around and check Dundalk Avenue's trash cans. Yeah,
I think the real crux on this issue becomes, if there are trash receptacles placed around this area, whose responsibility is it to empty them and maintain that? And whether or not we're trying to enforce a business owner to have to do that for what would be a public trash can, or is that something the county would be taking on as well?
Yeah, but most of the trash cans are next to bus stops.
Well, and that's its own ball of fun, because there's, the conflict between, is it the county, is it the MTA, is it the random unfortunate homeowner who happens to be near the bus stop and suddenly becomes responsible for the trash can that was placed at the bus stop by a public entity during a planned streetscape process. So
yeah,
it's a challenge, but it's
very much
more trash cans and a willingness on the county's part, in these areas where it's a commercial revitalization area. I think some coordinate, I don't know how trash cans in Towson are handled. I honestly don't know. If it's individual businesses, that's useful to know. But when the county puts a public trash can along Dundalk Avenue as part of a streetscape, I think most people would reasonably infer that the county was planning to take responsibility for that. So that's
right. But another option also is maybe having one of the street cleaners come through Dundalk Avenue like once a week, sweeping out. I'm sure it's impossible, but hey, it's worth a shot.
These are all great points. Oh, go ahead. Did I just interrupt someone, or am I hearing an echo? I think I'm hearing an echo. Yeah, trash is a perennial issue, and I've taken notes on all of this, and I'll do a little investigating on what the cans are in the commercial revitalization district. My hope would be that with this district designation and the expansion of the boundaries, that there are more resources focused in the area, and that will include maintenance like trash pickup.
Yeah, just to close that issue, I just want to say that I've never heard a county I've never heard any of the county leadership in any sort say anything about trying to resolve the issue in terms of whose responsibility it is or getting it done. And it really affects on areas it really affects an area's presence, and to not have that done, and to not have trash trash cans emptied and trash picked up. So I really think county leadership, and it has nothing to do with what you're talking about, Jesse, but county leadership needs to begin to address this, and they need to get on it and not ignore it.
Well, I'll definitely take that up the chain to my colleagues, and I thank you guys for the feedback on that, because you're right. It is especially in a area you're trying to revitalize. The commercial environment. It is important that it look clean and maintained, and that's the team effort. Well, that's it for the guidelines. I do, if I know that we went through it kind of fast. Hold on. Stop sharing my screen. So if you have any other, suggestions or thoughts that come to you in the next week or so, I encourage you to reach out and let me know. And I'm just going to show y'all real quick how to navigate to share my screen. So this is my contact information, jtillman@baltimoreCountyMD.gov, and my phone number, 410-887-3480. So if you have any other ideas, if there are total categories or themes that we missed, just reach out. And let's see. There we go. Can you guys still see my screen? Yes, okay.
Jesse,
So
there was one final point I wanted to make, which is you had a great slide at the beginning of this. First of all, thank you for all of your work on this, and thank you to to county planning and everybody who's been working on this. It is appreciated to have this additional focus and emphasis on the appearance and aesthetics of our commercial revitalization areas. So thank you. And then you had a great slide toward the beginning where you showed other sort of designations that apply to the Dundalk area.
yes.
And one that I don't think was on there was the Dundalk National Register Historic District, which the Main Street is part of. There are parts of the commercial revitalization area that aren't, and particularly the expanded boundaries that aren't going to be part of that National Register District, but I think it's an important thing to emphasize. There are tax credits that hypothetically somebody could apply for within that historic district. So I get it that multiple boundaries can be confusing to people, but I think it would be useful to point out. And then the other thing is if the Logan Village Shopping Center and South is part of a opportunity zone. So I don't know whether that's another thing to add, just to give you more work. But those are just two thoughts.
No, thank you. That's true. There are additional resources provided through both of those designations, the historic designation and the opportunity zone. So thank you. I did miss that. And hopefully in combination, all of these designations will, we'll see continued revitalization in the area, and these guidelines will just be part of that momentum. And so I just wanted to show y'all real quick, if you just kind of Google or search Baltimore County Planning Department, you'll come to our webpage where you'll see all of our current initiatives, including Master Plan 2030, more coming on that soon. But at the bottom here is the design review panel designations and design guidelines. If you click on the Learn How to Become Involved, you'll get to our little hub page here, and Dundalk's guidelines are here. And this is where,
Oh, Essex zoning guidelines. Really?
yeah, Essex guidelines are coming up as well. They've gone through the same process. And then at the bottom of this page, you'll find the guidelines in their current draft. And when this meeting's over, I will upload the new recording of this meeting. So you can get all the info here. Thank you all so much for your time, and please do reach out if you have additional input you'd like to provide. I appreciate y'all.
Thank you, Jesse.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Night.
Thank you.
Night.
Bye-bye.
So over.
Mm.